As I've done more and more of these Generation 3 solo challenges, I have noticed a raging debate in the community. Whenever I mention this subject, it seems like all of you are just compelled to share your honest and raw opinions in the comments. What is the subject, you probably are asking? Well, it's natures, more specifically speed-lowering natures. The questions are they good, do they have a place, or is it only valid to pick between the typical competitive natures for an individual Pokemon? I intend to answer these questions and more today in this video, because as a part of the project of solo running the main series games with every species, I really need to develop my understanding of natures and hopefully start making better choices in the future. And that brings me to the choice that I made for this particular run. Today, I'm going to be using a Brave Spinda, and you might think that that is a brave choice, because if you didn't know, the Brave nature lowers Spinda's speed and raises its attack. Although I have to say, I am very confident, perhaps overconfident, that this is the right choice, but I expect an uproar from you in the comments either way. And speaking of uproar, that is how we're going to be starting the game because it's a fantastic normal type move that Spinda starts with. But before we get into Spinda's move pool, let's talk about its stats. They are perfectly balanced with 60 across the board, giving it a base stat total of 360. By the way, this is the same as Pokemon like Aipom, Elekid, Larvesta, Loudred, and Whirlipede. So, not a great group of Pokemon. The fact that there is a baby among this list makes me a little bit worried. Going into this playthrough, I was really expecting Spinda to not perform particularly well in Pokemon Emerald. This game is quite challenging to solo run, especially because Steven Stone, a Steel-type specialist, is the final boss. And I'm using a normal type. Luckily though, Spinda does have some advantages. Its growth rate is fast, which is good for these solo runs. It has the ability Own Tempo, meaning it can't be confused, which is a nice advantage. And then through level up, it gets access to some decent moves. Feint Attack at level 12 for special damage against Roxanne, Psybeam at 16 for psychic type coverage against Brawly, and then Hypnosis at level 23, just in case I want to use my favorite move. Beyond that though, things go downhill. It gets Dizzy, Punch, Teeter Dance, Psych Up, Double Edge, Flail, and Thrash. All moves which are kind of centered around the theme of confusion or damaging yourself, which is really interesting from a design standpoint, but I'm not going to be using many of these moves today. Through TM and HM, it gets access to some decent coverage. Water Pulse, Dig, Psychic, Shadow Ball, Brick Break, Shockwave. Like, that's really good for a normal type. Also, it gets access to Calm Mind, one of the best moves in the entire game. And I want to be able to leverage this special attack boosting move in the late game, so I'm going to use Hidden Power Fire so that I have coverage for Steven. But that's a long way off, so settle in. Now, let's talk about the early game. I'm going to battle most of the trainers to level up, so I'm a decent level for Roxanne and Brawly, which technically Spinda should be disadvantaged against. Uproar makes this training very quick because it has an effective power of 75, which is great for the early game. At level 12, I learned Feint Attack, which does deal special damage in Generation 3, but I don't think this is going to be enough for Roxanne. I decided to go to Route 116, continue my training, and then inside the gym, I level up to 16, getting access to Psybeam. Okay, I am really confident that this is going to be enough for Roxanne. She leads with Geodude. It is level 12, it has terrible special, and I am able to do more than half to it with my psychic type move. Here is where I want to talk about speed against her, because having a lower speed stat during this battle is actually an advantage. It means the Geodude and Nosepass are going to prioritize Rock Tomb a little bit less, because they only use this move when they want to speed control you. The Geodude unfortunately will still use Rock Throw once your speed has been lowered enough, but the Nosepass becomes completely useless, choosing Block, Harden, or Tackle instead. So while this knowledge feels very contrary and it is hidden from most of us, in this case against Roxanne, a speed lowering nature is actually an advantage. After one speed drop, my Spinda has exactly 17 speed, which is not enough to bypass the Nosepass using one more Rock Tomb. That said, I potentially could have just run Feint Attack here because I would have 2-hit the Geodudes. By doing that, I would have one less speed for the Nosepass, I would be moving second, but it wouldn't be choosing its best move. Either way, surprising no one, it doesn't really matter. Roxanne's ace just uses useless things for a while she heals it. Eventually, I do confuse it, which is great, but on the final turn it has in battle, it just chooses Block, which is absolutely useless. So I've earned myself the first badge. With it comes a 10% boost to my attack stat, and also the TM for Rock Tomb, which Spinda can learn. Now I hate this move. If you've watched my videos before, you will know that. So anytime I can skip teaching it to my Pokemon, I am really thankful. It makes the run feel so much more smooth. And today, I don't think Spinda's gonna need it. An advantage that Spinda has as a normal type is that once I arrive in Dufor Island, I can pick up the Silk Scarf immediately to boost the power of Uproar by 10%. I'm not gonna use it right away. Instead, I'm gonna go to the Pokemon Center, deposit my HM users, and then head into the gym to face the trainers. I wanted extra experience because I'm anticipating that Watson might be slightly problematic. I don't have access to a move that is going to be exceptional against his Magneton, because Dig is only available once you can use Rock Smash outside of battle, and you need the Dynamo badge to do that. I said recently in my Fire Red Porygon video that normal types that get access to a Psychic type move feel fantastic because of their coverage. They can counter out their Fighting type weakness with this move. And for Spinda with balanced stats, although my special attack is lagging behind because of badge boosts, I'm still feeling confident against Brawly. And his battle is another perfect opportunity for us to examine some speed interactions. Brawly's team of 3 is an interesting case when it comes to speed. His Machop has 18 and his Makuhita has 19, with his Metatype being the fastest Pokemon with 26. However, its only damage dealing move is Focus Punch, which has lower priority. So as long as I'm using a move that at least has a 0 priority bracket, I am always going to move first against the Metatype when it's doing damage dealing stuff. That means functionally, in order to outspeed all of Brawly's Pokemon and avoid taking damage, you only need 20 speed. While Spinda isn't able to one-shot any of his Pokemon using Psybeam, it does take them all down in 2 hits. The Makuhita survives. I was a little bit concerned about it going for reversal, but luckily for me it just chooses Bulk Up, and that's a win. Also, Churro is saying hi to all of you. Okay, now that Brawly is cleared and I have my second badge, this is where the speed interactions in Pokemon Emerald get a little bit wonky. Watson is the 3rd gym leader, and his badge gives me a speed boost. Also, like I mentioned before, the Dig TM isn't available before you battle him. And complicating matters even more, Watson is an electric type specialist, meaning his Pokemon are quite fast. His Voltorb has 49 speed and his Manectric has 55 speed. So essentially what's going to happen is the early game requires low speeds for the first 2 gym leaders, and then once you arrive at Watson, you need a very high speed in comparison with the level the Pokemon would be at on minimum battles to that point in the game. Yes, Churro is just going to talk the entire time I do this voiceover. He's being so noisy today. Here's a spreadsheet that illustrates this point. On the y-axis, I've listed base speeds from 5 all the way to 150, and on the x-axis, I have listed the majority of the major battles throughout an Emerald playthrough. The speed stats that are calculated within this table are all derived from a minimum battles route using a fast growth rate Pokemon with a neutral speed nature. If the speed stat is red, then my Pokemon will not outspeed the fastest Pokemon on that trainer's team. If it's yellow, then I have a speed tie with that Pokemon, and if it's green, then I'm going to move first against every single Pokemon on their team. I think this is a fantastic way of showing the fact that Rival 2 and Watson demand the highest speed out of all of the trainers in Pokemon Emerald. Once I make it to Steven, with a fast growth rate Pokemon on minimum battles, it would outspeed all of his Pokemon at only base 75 speed. Of course, as you've seen in the early game, I am not doing this playthrough on minimum battles, so I'm going to be a much higher level, which is why I felt very confident using a Brave Nature on Spinda. Lowering my speed is still going to give me outspeeds in the late game, but it could cause problems in what's immediately ahead for me. As we saw in the previous chart, the Rivals team was one of the trickiest to outspeed throughout the entire playthrough, but that is only true when he chooses Trico. It is by far the fastest of the 3 starters, but it's also the starter that gives his team the least total experience earned when you defeat him. For that reason, I used it for my minimum battles route, so it was also minimum experience. I do just want to briefly say here, thank you so much to Austin for going in and recording an entire Kyogre playthrough, so we had the root file in order to manipulate all of the data and get these charts that I'm going to be showing throughout the rest of the video. Also, thank you to Otto, who put together a Python script that allows us to scrape this data out of any route. So from now until the end of time, I will be able to get this level of detail in terms of speed comparisons for these runs. In my opinion, the speed stat is the most important stat in the entire game, because as long as you outspeed, things go so much better for your Pokemon. And for Spinda, all of this is actually a good thing, because I'm not going to be facing the Grovyle team, because of course the Combusken team is super effective against me, and that feels like the rival that Game Freak would have put Spinda up against if it was one of the available starters. The thing is, Psybeam, like against Brawly, is very good against Combusken, which is also a fighting type. So a lot of hype for really literally nothing. The rival is very simple. I defeat him and make it to Mauville City. But maybe the hype was worth it because Watson is coming up next and he is going to be a problem. I don't have anything that counters his Magneton other than Hypnosis, and this move is really bad after Generation 1. The only reason it's useful in those games is because you can put the Pokemon back to sleep before it ever attacks again. In Generation 3, on the turn the Pokemon wakes up, it is going to attack, dealing damage to Spinda. Or in the case of Magneton, more likely paralyzing me with Thunder Wave, messing me up for the remainder of the fight. Because I anticipated him being such a threat, I decided to take my time, and I fought so many trainers in the surrounding area. During this training, I think I should mention the fact that the fast growth rate is not actually optimal in the early game. It really only starts to become the best growth rate around level 30, so starting now, Spinda is going to start to gain some serious momentum in terms of the rate that it levels up. All of the training in the surrounding area normally gets Pokemon to around 30 to maybe level 33 depending on growth rate. Sometimes a little bit lower if you're an awful growth rate like the erratic growth rate. That one is just trash in the early game. For Spinda though, it makes it all the way to level 35. Okay, I'm gonna heal one last time. So my moveset going into the Watson fight is Dizzy Punch, Psybeam, Feint Attack, and Hypnosis. I'm holding the Cherry Berry to counter out Paralysis, so hopefully this is going to be enough. I'm pretty excited about this fight because it is a chance for me to use Dizzy Punch, a move that sees very little play during my solo challenges. In Generation 1 it has no secondary effect, but starting in Generation 2 it has a 20% chance to confuse the opponent. As a normal type move it also gets the same type attack bonus, so it's fantastic against Watson's Voltorb and Electrike. Also, since this video is about speed stats, at level 35 with the fast growth rate, I have 54 speed, which is one less than the Manectric. However, Watson is another curious case of speed stats not mattering that much, because the Magneton, a steel type, comes out first, and it resists normal type moves, as well as psychic moves and dark type moves in Generation 3. That type interaction was changed starting in Generation 6. They made the steel type a little bit less good defensively, so it takes neutral damage from ghost and dark type moves. In this case, since all my moves are resisted, Dizzy Punch ends up being the best move to use in terms of effective power. Now I said the Magneton was a curious case in terms of speed because it loves to use Thunder Wave to speed control your Pokemon. I generally run a Cherry Berry to counter out this tactic, and I'm also running Hypnosis so I can put it to sleep. If it does successfully paralyze your Pokemon, then by the time you make it to the Manectric, your speed stat is cut, so it's going to move first anyway. Well, unless you're ridiculously fast or have a Pokemon with speed boost like Ninjask. I was surprised here, Hypnosis actually comes through for me, and I am able to knock out the Magneton and move on to the Manectric, although I get paralyzed right before this happens. So once again, the speed threshold is a little bit lower for this fight in most realistic scenarios. You just need 50 speed to be able to move first, and with a fast growth rate, Spinda was easily able to achieve that. Even with paralysis, I'm able to knock out the Manectric and earn myself the third badge, still with no resets. With Watson defeated, my speed stat gets increased because his badge gives it a 10% boost. This one comes earlier on than in a game like Red and Blue or Yellow, where the speed boost happens from Koga's badge. But starting in Generation 2, the speed boost is always given by the third gym leader. This really helps Pokemon with low speed stats outspeed other enemy AI-controlled opponents because they don't have this same benefit. There are also two other factors that generally work in the solo Mon's advantage in terms of speed. The first one is the fact that I can overlevel, and I am definitely guilty of that. On the next routes, I train against far too many trainers. I think I could have cut some of this, but I filmed this Spinda run a while ago. I filmed it on April 8th, so I've had a long time to reflect on my play and understand that this is probably not the optimal choice, especially after clearing Watson, who is typically the most difficult gym leader in Pokemon Emerald. Just before I talk about the third advantage that I have in terms of speed, I want to mention the fact that I'm going to pick up the Dig TM in Fall Arbor Town. This is a ground type move, and I think it's going to be fantastic for Spinda to use against Flannery, who's the next gym leader. Okay, so I also get access to EVs, which the enemy doesn't. And if we look at the amount of EVs that Spinda currently has, it has 52 in its speed. The next highest is HP with 47, and everything else is either around or under 30. What this means is I am gaining HP and speed EVs disproportionately proportionately to how fast I'm gaining the other EVs. On this route there's also a hidden Carbos which I can use to improve my speed EVs up to 62. There's also a protein, but that only helps my attack catch up. It's at 34 right now. If you didn't know, in Generation 1, 2, and 3, all of the enemy Pokemon have 0 stat experience or EVs. So this is the final metric in which my solo Pokemon is always going to be ahead of the enemy Pokemon. Okay, let's come back to one of these speed charts because I do need to mention EVs in relation to it. The reason I had Austin play out a full route using Kyogre was so we could collect the exact EV yields that come from all of the minimum battle trainers, so that when calculating these stats we could use EVs in the calculations. So just know all of these calculations will always factor in the effort values as they would be exactly within the route. Okay, so this chart is showing a negative speed nature, and even with a negative speed nature, Flannery's team is the slowest major battle of the entire game. With a negative speed nature, in order to guarantee moving first against all 4 of her Pokemon on minimum battles with a fast growth rate, I only need base 40 speed. And with Dig now on my moveset, I don't expect to have problems against her. However, one trainer I didn't include in this list is Maxie, and I have to fight him atop Mount Chimney. Right now his team isn't very fast. His Mightyena is the quickest Pokemon with 42 speed. Beyond that, the Zubat has 35 and the Camerupt has a low 29. This battle's a little annoying because I have to use Dizzy Punch against the Mightyena. It lowers my accuracy with Sand Attack. Luckily I am able to 2-hit. Beyond that, Zubat goes down to a single Psybeam and Camerupt's all that's left, but this thing's moveset is not very good. I don't want to give it a chance for double damage with Magnitude using Dig, so instead I use Dizzy Punch and 2-Shot. Okay, before heading to Leverage Town to face Flannery, I'm going to backtrack to Fall Arbor Town and pick up the Return TM. While I do that, let me talk about Maxie again. His Crobat later in the game is one of the quicker opponents, but it's generally not a problem because his team is only 3 Pokemon, and using a Bitterberry or a Substitute, you can usually just get through him without any issues. So I didn't include that battle on the major battles list, just because it's typically not challenging. Okay, so I skipped over Secret Power in this run because I didn't think it was much better than Dizzy Punch, but now I am going to teach Return in its place to boost my effective power from 105 up to 130. Okay, now let's take on Flannery. If speed isn't a concern for Spinda in this battle, what could possibly go wrong? Well, the Camerupt or the Torkoal could survive a hit. The Numel and the Slugma obviously aren't, they're both really bad. I get lucky against the Camerupt getting a critical hit, so it falls to a single return, and that leads to her Torkoal, by far the most defensive Pokemon on her team, and it also hits really hard with Overheat. Its held item is a White Herb, so it's going to recover its special attack stat after it attacks with its most powerful move. I wanted to play around this using Hypnosis to put it to sleep because I don't think Return is going to one-hit, and it's probably not going to 2-hit. Dig has a slightly lower effective power, so using the normal type move is going to be the superior choice. My Hypnosis misses, Torkoal sets up Sunny Day, which is not good. Then I miss again, it hits with Overheat, doing more than half, but that actually shows me something about the damage range there. I potentially could just go for Return and knock it out in 2 hits, or in this case it looks like 3, giving Flannery time to use a Hyper Potion. This buys her 1 extra turn where the Torkoal wakes up, uses Overheat, and because once again it's leveraging its full special attack, Spinda faints. That is my first reset, and I did not expect it to happen on Flannery, and it wasn't related to speed at all, so still the brave nature is the correct choice. By the way, while producing this video, I looked at Smogon, and in Sun and Moon, which is the last game that Spinda was available in, the competitive set actually uses a brave nature. So that's another reason you should trust me in this choice. Although if you look back at its Generation 3 competitive set, it utilizes a timid nature which boosts speed, and that's completely contrary to the point that I'm trying to make here, so just ignore that piece of information. Well, what I'm actually going to do is make a case for why competitive Pokemon is really different from the solo challenge format in this video. By the end, I think you'll be convinced. In my second fight against Flannery, I'm not able to 2-shot the Camerupt. It's not really a problem because it's kind of a bad Pokemon and she just wastes her Hyper Potion here before the Torkoal. Once again, I am trying to go for Hypnosis, but I don't think this makes sense. If Sunny Day isn't established, then Overheat won't do enough damage. If the Torkoal needs to use Sunny Day, then I should just spam Return and knock it out over 3 turns, especially if she's already used her healing item. Either way, I put it to sleep, and this gives me the time I need to knock it out with 3 uses of Return. With that, I earn myself the Heat Badge. This one doesn't give me any stat boosts, so I'm just going to quickly backtrack through the middle of the map, and then face Norman, who is the next gym leader. Spinda is quite good against him because he can utilize the Silk Scarf to boost the power of return instead of my typical Person Berry. I usually like to run that so I can set up against his Spinda and not get confused, but with own tempo I don't need to be worried about that. Against the Slacking I can put it to sleep, which is fantastic when it has Trubont. It is going to do so little when it has a status condition. I get hit by Yawn, which is kind of annoying. I get put to sleep, then it starts using Facade on me, but it can't attack quick enough. So eventually Spinda wakes up, puts his ace back to sleep, and then slowly chips away as he uses a Hyper Potion. Eventually, his ace does go down, and his final two Pokemon, the Vigoroth as well as the Linoon, are both one-hits using Return. Alright, that gives me the Balance Badge, which Spinda needs. This thing is always looking like it's about to fall over. This one also gives me a boost to my defense stat, which will be useful later into the game when I have to face Steven Stone, who has primarily physical attacks. In the next section of the game, Pokemon typically get access to an expanded move pool. Moves like Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, but Spinda doesn't get either of these. I am going to go to Slateport City and pick up the Hidden Power TM, as well as a rare candy over by the abandoned ship, and one between Slateport City and Mauville City. Heading north to Fort Tree City, I accidentally run into this guy. He's Bugcatcher Kent. He has a Ninjask. I'm doing this intentionally, very obviously intentionally, so that I can show you a Pokemon that's very fast and how it goes up against Spinda. In this case, with my speed lowering nature, the Ninjask has 85 speed and my Spinda has 73. So I'm not close to outspeeding, but I'm not that far away. I think I expected this gap between the two Pokemon to be a little bit bigger. The rival before Fort Tree City is never really an issue. While the Combuskin does get a turn to do something, it just goes for bulk up and then I knock it out. As I'm clearing the Kecleon for Steven, I level up to 45 and have the chance to learn Double Edge. It has base 120 power starting in Generation 2, so it's pretty good as a normal type move. If I need a little bit more damage for a key Pokemon, it's going to be better than Return with an effective power of 198. By the way, if you don't think the numbers are adding up, the effective powers are also calculating in the 10% boost from the Silk Scarf. Sometimes I get comments about that, so I figured I'd just address it now. Before Winona, I need to really consider what my options are against her Skarmory. As a flying type specialist, Dig is not very useful, and with only base 60 power, it's really not that good in the late game. I'm going to teach Hidden Power Fire in its place, so I have an answer for the upcoming Steel type. Alright Winona, let's go through the speeds here. 45, 41, 51, 56, and 68. So in order to move first, you need 69 speed. And it's nice that Spinda has 79, so I'm easily moving first against all of her Pokemon. I one-shot the Swablu, then I used Double Edge on the Tropius, but I think I probably should have just used Return here. If it had, for example, set up Sunny Day, then I would do extra damage with Hidden Power Fire, and that could have been useful against the Skarmory. Well, provided the Pelipper doesn't stall me out long enough, it survives a single Return, and then it uses Protect a bunch. I hate this move. Anyway, I knock it out eventually, move on to the Skarmory, where I can use Hidden Power Fire to knock it out using 2 hits, so she gets a pesky Hyper Potion in before I finally take it down. Last is Altaria. I have half health remaining for it. I go for Return, it does about 3/4. Altaria sets up with Dragon Dance. This is one moment where it is now faster than Spinda, but the only material difference this makes is printing a little bit extra text and animating my HP bar. Aerial Ace doesn't do enough damage, and with that, Winona's Ace faints. Okay, after doing that voiceover, I realized that I had forgotten something. Back earlier in Winona's gym, we're just gonna rewind for a second, there is this trainer who has a Swellow and a Xatu. They are very fast, the Swellow specifically, with 82 speed. So this Pokemon is able to move first against Spinda, but it doesn't matter. It just raises its evasion with Double Team and then I knock it out in a single hit. Although for some Pokemon, especially those that are weak to flying types, this can be problematic. Because once I knock out the Xatu, then this other trainer battles me. The reason it wasn't a double battle is because I deposited all of my HM users in the PC before going into the gym. Okay, so that's just a small quirk that you have to consider sometimes with Pokemon when you're using speed lowering natures, but it's rarely relevant and it really isn't for Spinda. On my way to Lily Cove City, I explore Mount Pyre. Here I can grab the Shadow Ball TM, which is going to be useful against Tate and Liza, who are the next major battle. But before them, I have to go through the 2 hideouts. First is Maxie. His Crobat has 110 speed, so there is no way for me to outspeed it. One thing that Austin did make me aware of though is that Maxie likes to use Scary Face to lower your speed by 2 stages. This cuts your speed stat directly in half and rounds down. The Camerupt on his team, which is another slow Pokemon, has 43 speed. So provided your Pokemon has exactly 88 speed, you will still move first against his Ace when you get there, even if you get hit by 1 Scary Face. In this case, my fast growth rate Spinda is level 50 with a Brave Nature, and it has exactly 89 speed. This seems like I planned it. I really didn't, but it's convenient convenient. I don't get hit by Scary Face, so it's completely irrelevant, but it's a speed interaction, so I had to mention it. Crobat's his second Pokemon. It's annoying because I got hit by Intimidate, so it takes me a little while to knock it out. And after that, the Camerupt comes in and uses Amnesia. An amazing move against my Spinda. Aqua Admin Matt has a Golbat, which only has 68 speed. He's not relevant. After all, this guy is all style, no substance. Surrounding Moss Deep City, I grab a rare candy in Shoal Cave. Heading south of the city, I grab myself a rare candy. In Pacific Town, I get another return TM. And then just west of it, I grab myself another rare candy. This leaves me with a total of 13. After defeating the mandatory trainers in Tate and Liza's gym, I am exactly level 56, with only 1% experience towards the next level, so this is a perfect opportunity to use rare candies. I'm once again going to bring up the neutral nature speed chart that I showed earlier. Note here that all of the speed stats jump from Winona to Tate and Liza. That is because I'm using rare candies there. However, I'm only using 11, because that's the number that's available to that point in the game on minimum battles. If you want to get the other two, you have to do additional battles. So while the coming threats do have more speed, access to rare candies means that most Pokemon don't really need to worry about that. Once I've used all 13 rare candies, I'm level 69, and my Spinda has 125 speed. I teach it Shadow Ball in the place of Psybeam, and now I'm ready to face Tate and Liza. Speed review, 78 on the Claydol, 95 on the Xatu, 76 on both the Lunatone and the Solrock. Against the Claydol, I go for Return to have a little bit more punch. Yes, this move does do more damage when compared with Shadow Ball. Although I start using the Ghost type move against their other Pokemon, apparently it doesn't matter which I use because every single team member they have is a one-shot for Spinda. I think in recent times, one of the biggest changes to my Emerald routes has been the fact that I am using rare candies before Tate and Liza in pretty much every playthrough. Saving them until before Steven or until before the Elite Four is just not as good. Using them this early on doesn't cut too many levels from the late game, and it also gives me options here because this is one of the hardest battles in the playthrough. Still, not as hard as Watson, but it is difficult. Okay, so you ready for some speed? Maxie's Crobat in the Space Center has 124. Yeah, it's fast, but it's not very good, so irrelevant as usual. Archie's Crobat is a little bit slower with only 118 speed, but as was the case with Maxie's Crobat, my Spinda is faster, so completely irrelevant again. Let's move on. Rayquaza saves the day. I grab the Brick Break TM, and after completing some ice puzzles, it is time to face Flan. His team is very underwhelming for so many reasons, one of them being their speed stats. Love Disc has 94, Whiscash 70, Celio 59, Crawdaunt 62, and Kingdra 106. His ace is by far the fastest Pokemon and usually the scariest. It has Rest, a Chesto Berry, and also Ice Beam. Plus it can set up with Double Team to really ruin your day. But yeah, Spinda doesn't have any problems, so that's it. Juan is defeated, there are no gyms left. Before I head to the Elite Four, I stop by the department store to use the Move Tutor to teach Spinda Substitute in the place of Double Edge. I also backtrack to grab 2 more rare candies, just in case I need them against a trainer like Wallace. Wally's next, and he is completely simple, so with him out of the way, let's take on the Elite Four. Sydney's up first. Mightyena immediately intimidates me, but I've saved the White Herb for this moment. I can then set up Substitute and sweep his team with ease. This is typically the best strategy against him with most Pokemon, although it's not as time efficient as using a move that's special and then just spamming attacks. The fastest Pokemon on his team is the Shiftry with 105 speed, so I'm not going to be moving second here with Spinda. Phoebe's next. I have Shadow Ball for her team. I get free setup with Substitute because the Dusclops loves Protect turn 1, while she does heal it, taking me more time to knock it out. My second hit rolls better damage. I thought I wasn't going to get the knockout, but I do. One potential loss condition here is running out of moves because she PP stalls you with things like Protect, using Pressure on both the Dusclops, and then the Sableye using Double Team. But that's not a problem for Spinda. Shadow Ball has enough PP, I have a Leppa Berry, and I also have Hidden Power as a fallback if I really need it. Substitute continues being amazing against Glacia, who sets up Hail on the first turn with Celio. Okay, so speed stats. Glalie number 1, 100. Celio, 67. Glalie number 2, 103. It's her fastest Pokemon. And Walrein has 99. By the way, I didn't even mention speed during the Phoebe fight because her fastest Pokemon, the second Bayonet, only has 91. It feels a little bit weird to me that Sydney, the first Elite Four member, contains the fastest Pokemon of the first 3 members. However, once Glacia is defeated, which Spinda does easily, then I have to take on Drake, and he is the first trainer in the game that feels like his whole team is just consistently fast. Looking at the negative speed nature chart, of all of of the trainers after Norman, he is the trainer that requires the highest base speed to move first against all of his team. In this case requiring 85 base speed, whereas 80 base speed will give me an underspeed on the Salamence, but I would still move first against everything else. There are a couple things that make this battle easier. Number one is a setup move because the Shelgon loves Protect on turn 1. I'm using Substitute here, but I want to draw your attention to the fact that I am not using Calm Mind. Objectively, I believe this is a mistake. If I had taught a move like Psychic, the TM is available in Victory Road, then I could combo it with Calm Mind and Substitute, set up on the Shelgon, and then sweep Drake's team with relative ease. But I'm not doing that. I'm trying to just set up Substitute and then use Return to knock out all of his Pokemon. They're just barely bulky enough to survive my hits and break my Substitute. The Flygon then breaks my Substitute again after the Kingdra, which is annoying, and I'm on low health by the time the Salamence comes in. Spinda, with a speed lowering nature, is still faster than this Pokemon by 5 speed, although I have had to over level in order to pull this off. After an Intimidate, I only do half damage with Return, and Flamethrower knocks me out. I didn't take the easy choice here, setting up with Calm Mind. Instead, I just used 2 rare candies and then try the fight again. And it still does not go well. I take a lot of damage, and by the time the Flygon comes in, I'm on half health. It gets a critical hit with Earthquake, and Spinda goes down without even making it to the Salamence. I'm really kicking myself watching this footage back now, seeing myself not use Calm Mind. Like, the answer is so obvious right here. Calm Mind with Psychic for Drake, and then teach Shockwave for Wallace seems like a really good strategy. Also, setting up against Wallace is very easy once you start increasing your special defense. I could even teach Rest if I was worried about having too little health to fully set up. While we watch me beat Drake with the Citrus Berry, which is objectively not very smart, although it does give me just enough health to survive the Salamence's final hit, I do want to mention something exceptional said to me behind the scenes recently, which I really think is true. With these challenges, I try and plan as much as is possible, but when I sit down to play the Pokemon, it's essentially game day. I'm doing the best I can with it, but I'm always going to make mistakes along the way because I am a flawed human, and I don't really pause between every single battle and meticulously think out exactly every turn before I go into those fights. I just start the run, and then I play until the end, and we see what happens. So with a slightly anticlimactic victory over Drake, I survive the Dragon Claw on 29 hit points and knock his final Pokemon out with Return. It is now time for the final 2 trainers in this run. Wallace is really interesting in terms of speed. His Pokemon are much slower than Drake's overall. The fastest Pokemon is Tentacruel with 118 speed, Milotic is just behind it with 116, and then Gyarados is just behind it with 113. Interestingly enough, the Ludicolo is actually the Pokemon that is potentially the fastest here if Wailord sets up Rain Dance and then it comes in second. That's pretty niche though. I don't think it's really important to plan for the Ludicolo using Swift Swim specifically. Instead, what makes sense to me is trying to outspeed either Drake's Kingdra, his Flygon, or his Salamence. If you move first against any of those, then you're likely going to move first against most of Wallace's team. If you outspeed either the Flygon or the Salamence, you definitely will, and if you outspeed the Kingdra, there is potential for you to. You could have like 119 speed, for example, which would be great against 3 of Drake's Pokemon and good against all of Wallace's. This is another battle where I am using a suboptimal strategy. Return for primary damage, Substitute for defense, and Shockwave just because I guess the Gyarados, it does one hit, leading to his final Milotic. It has good special defense, so I'm using the physical move, Return in this case, but Calm Mind likely would have been the better choice here. Still, Spinda is good enough that it's able to take a first attempt victory. And with Wallace defeated, my speed is exactly 141, which is very important, because the final trainer in this run is Steven Stone. His fastest Pokemon is Claydol, which is really weird. Okay, in terms of speed, Steven is the fastest trainer, which seems really strange because he has a lot of rock Pokemon which are generally quite slow, and he also has steel types which are also not known for their speed. At least I don't think they are. Skarmory has 136 speed, Claydol has 140, Aggron has 114, Claydol 102, Armaldo 96, and Metagross 138. I used a rare candy before this battle, so I have 146 speed now, and with this I'm going to move first against every single one of Steven's Pokemon. If you plan a run just to outspeed Steven's fastest Pokemon, the Claydol, then you know you're going to outspeed Drake, and you're also going to outspeed Wallace. Which brings me back to the fact that Watson is really the ultimate speed threshold in the entire playthrough. After you get your speed boost, Flannery is very slow, and from there you can use rare candies to make up for a lot of the late game speed deficits. Emerald is just a game where the enemy Pokemon are not very fast. That is the reality of the situation. Okay, so let's talk about my strategy for Steven. It's very straightforward. Substitute for for defense, Calm Mind to set up my special attack, Hidden Power for damage, and Rest to recover health because the Skarmory is going to deal a decent amount of damage every time it chooses Steel Wing. Substitute is helpful in combination with Rest just in case his Pokemon gets a critical hit. That way I only lose the substitute and I can re-establish it, accounting for the next critical hit. As long as I'm not poisoned, a poison type, or a steel type, it's going to try to poison me with Toxic occasionally, wasting turns. It can also miss with Steel Wing, its highest power move. I get set up all the way to +6, and then I knock it out with a single hit from Hidden Power Fire. Next is Armaldo. It's a rock type, so it does not go down to a single hit. It takes my health into the red, then he uses a full restore, and I knock it out with 2 more Hidden Power Fires. Okay, time for the Clay Doll. I figured I'd take things slow here and rest up, but it's actually doing a decent amount of damage to me, which is a little concerning. Although, eventually it's going to use Reflect and Light Screen, wasting some time, giving me a more successful heal. Also, it is possible to stall the Clay Doll out, which I end up having to do because it's doing just too much damage when it chooses Earthquake. Eventually, when it runs out of Ancient Power and Earthquake, only 15 total PP there, I am then able to slowly chip away at it using Hidden Power Fire. At long last it goes down and Aggron comes in next. Hidden Power Fire does more than half. It sets up Solar Beam, which is going to be useless, and I take it down. Cradily falls to 2 Hidden Power Fires, and that leaves only the Metagross. Okay, so with +6, Spinda hits it and knocks it out in a single hit. Yeah, I beat Steven Stone on my first attempt with this thing. Looking at its base stats, I just didn't think it had this kind of performance in it. Its first playthrough is a time of 1 hour, 38 minutes, and 34 seconds, with 3 resets, 0 blackouts, and it finished the game at level 81 because of its fast growth rate. This took 6 hours and 18 minutes of game time. Okay, let's bring up my first attempt tier list, and I think the results are going to be a little bit surprising to all of you. Right now, Solrock is the top dog with a time of 1 hour, 35 minutes, and 24 seconds in its first playthrough. In second place is Medicham with a time of 1 hour, 37 minutes, and 27 seconds. And in third place, we have Lunatone with 1 hour, 44 minute, and 42 second time. So Spinda is gonna beat out a Psychic type and take the 3rd overall spot. When I started this year, that was not on my bingo card. I did know that I was gonna be playing Spinda, and I thought it was gonna be absolutely awful. But this time is really good. I think it's also curious to mention that of the top 4 spots in the tier list, 3 of the Pokemon have the fast growth rate. Here's some insight into why this might be happening. Using the minimum battles data, I put together these tables showing the Pokemon's level at various points throughout the playthrough. At the start of the battle, at the end of the battle, and if I use 11 rare candies before Tate and Liza. What emerges from this data is the fact that the fast growth rate is by far the best. Without rare candies, a Pokemon with the fast growth rate finishes the game at level 60, whereas a Pokemon with the slow growth rate, by far the worst on minimum battles, it only finishes the game at level 51. Now, I was very clear with my wording there, worst on minimum battles, because the fluctuating growth rate is by far worst if the Pokemon needs a higher level at the end of the game. It gets so inefficient training these Pokemon past like level 65, 70, that it's going to make runs like Shroomish extremely painful. Luckily for me, most Pokemon that have the fluctuating or erratic growth rates were introduced in Generation 3, so beyond this point in the series, there aren't going to be too many of them that I have to deal with. Okay, so that's the first playthrough, but we all know first playthroughs aren't extremely accurate. I'm probably going to be able to improve Spinda's results, but I don't know by how much, just because the first run went really well. Let's get into it and see what I was able to do. As you saw during the previous playthrough, I do not need speed, so running a Brave Nature again is going to be the better choice. I want to muse on this just for a little bit, because I think for some people it makes more sense to just lower your special defense or defense. After all, having more attack is going to be better. Or maybe for a Pokemon that is very clearly a special attacker or a physical attacker, why wouldn't you just lower the other attacking stat? Well, solo challenges are very different from playing with a team. In a lot of cases, you'll have a special attacker that for one battle needs to utilize a move like Return or something else physical, maybe Dig for Flannery. In those cases, dropping your attack stat can take you away from critical damage ranges that allow you to get through those battles at lower level thresholds. So even with a Pokemon that seems like it should be running a modest nature to increase its special attack and lower its physical attack, maybe it's not always the best choice. At least for first playthroughs where there's some level of fog of war and you can't anticipate exactly everything unless you run like a major amount of calculations before you do the playthrough, but that's not how I play. So I tend to look for natures in a sequence. First, I try and see if a speed lowering nature works, then I look for a special defense lowering nature, because lowering your physical defense is a terrible idea when Steven is the final trainer in the run and generally the most difficult opponent. In the past, I have I've tried lowering my defense with a Pokemon that has a lot of defense like Nosepass, and we all saw how that went for me. By the way, check out the video if you haven't seen it already and you want to see me descend into absolute madness. I hated Nosepass so much. Gosh, one of the worst Pokemon I've ever done a solo challenge with. On the other hand, Spinda's actually, this thing's great. Okay, getting back to natures, some people push back on the fact that I should lower special defense because isn't Wallace the champion? And yes, he is the champion, but as I've showed before, his speed stats are not really that good. You might outspeed all of Wallace's Pokemon, but not outspeed a bunch of Steven's Pokemon. And in that case, you want more defense and less special defense. Plus, for a lot of Pokemon, they can raise their special defense using Calm Mind for Wallace, so that stat ends up being a non-issue. Specifically here for Spinda. But lowering special defense can make other fights much more difficult, like Watson for example, or maybe even Flannery. If you can maintain both of your defensive stats, then you're more likely to survive certain damage ranges and be able to make it through some battles at lower levels, again improving your overall speed throughout the game. And beating these games as fast as possible is what I'm trying to do. Lowering the Pokemon's speed ends up being ironically the thing that makes a lot of Pokemon go faster in these games. Typically, if a defense lowering nature won't work and a speed lowering nature won't work, I often consider neutral natures rather than lowering one of my attack stats, especially in first playthroughs. There are of course obvious cases where you're a special attacker and your physical attack is just completely awful and you'd never want to use it. Yeah, then use a modest nature and adamant nature. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cases like Spinda, where all your stats are balanced. Which one are you going to lower? Which one are you going to improve? In this case, as a normal type, which deals physical damage in Generation 3, boosting my attack makes the most sense, and I have enough speed to move first against everything because of my growth rate. Now I played the second playthrough right after the first playthrough on April 8th, so I'm not leveraging a bunch of my modern knowledge in this run, and I'm not going to go back and do a third playthrough with Spinda right now. But in the future, I would like to try to optimize this thing just a little bit more because I think it can cut a lot of mid-game training. Playing roughly the same route that I did last time, I'm able to get through Watson with no resets. This time for Flannery, I prepared by leveling up 3 more times so I can be over the next damage rounding threshold. What this gives me is a 2-hit against the Torkoal. Now, I'm not sure what the percent chance of doing that is because we didn't have access to RBY XP router when I filmed this video. We also didn't have any replay files, so I can't reconstruct the route or refilm the footage. My thought process here, without a lot of testing and rigorous data analysis outside of the speed stuff that I've done for this video, I just thought if I level up to 43 I'm going to have more damage and it's likely going to 2-shot the Torkoal, and it does, so no resets to Flannery either. Previously throughout the mid-game, I had a little bit of a wonky set, but in this playthrough, I go for something that's a lot more focused. It's focused on dealing damage. Return, Psybeam, Feint Attack, and Hidden Power Fire. I change out Feint Attack for Shadow Ball so I can manage Tate and Liza very easily, and then I am sad to say that I do not use the Calm Mind strategy throughout the Elite Four, making both Glacia and Drake a little bit slower, although I get through them with no resets. My major innovation here for Drake specifically is teaching Rest so that I can use it in combination with Substitute so I'm never on low health. And that brings me to Wallace, where I once again don't use Calm Mind, but Substitute plus Rest with Shockwave and Return is more than enough. Okay, Spinda's gonna finish the game at a higher level this time. I have overtrained. You can definitely cut levels from this playthrough to make Spinda go faster. However, I am still gonna get a better time than my previous run because the Skarmory is unable to knock me out and I get fully set up. From there, I sweep Steven's team with Hidden Power Fire and clock in with my second playthrough, a time of 1 hour 35 minutes and 12 seconds, with 0 resets, 0 blackouts at level 84. This is a game time of 6 hours and 13 minutes. I hope you can see why I didn't want to come back and do a third Spinda playthrough. This final run felt so good. Spinda felt dominant. It crushed the game. No resets. I did not expect this. Anyways, I'm really happy with these results. Going back in, getting a time that might be faster but sloppier would just not have the same level of satisfaction. I want to tie this video up. I think you get the point about speed. Hopefully by this point. If not, I don't think there's anything I can do to convince you. It's fine. Use a different nature. Also, as I've said before, I think you can get a much better time with Spinda by cutting some levels. So if you do decide to do that, check out the Discord link in the description and post your results for Spinda so that we can all learn a little bit more about this Pokemon. Thank you to everyone who supports me on YouTube through memberships. If you want to join and support this channel, click the join button below. By the way, it really does help out. It allows me to employ people so that we can make this content very detail oriented without cutting a lot of stuff. If I was making these videos on my own, I would probably only have time for a roughly 20 to 30 minute video once a week. But with all the help that you're allowing me to currently get, I am able to make much longer videos with a lot more specific details about these games. So thank you for allowing me to do this. Also, you can support me on Patreon. It doesn't matter which platform, whichever one is most convenient for you. That's why I have both. Okay, so now we've made it to that point, let's rank Spinda in the tier list. Its time's not going to seem nearly as dominant as it felt doing this run, just cause I've done recent re-rankings with Pokemon like Medicham, Absol, Exploud, Breloom, and Jirachi. At the current time, they're definitely making the tier list look very top heavy. I'm going to shuffle all the metrics at the beginning of 2025 so that we have a more balanced tier list. But for now, Spinda is able to earn itself the top spot in the C tier. It beat out Chimecho's re-ranking time of 1 hour 37 minutes and 36 seconds, which was just ahead of Relicanth, which had a time of 1 hour 38 minutes and 1 second. It's interesting to see how the Emerald tier list is quite stratified. We have a ton of Pokemon near the top right now, some absolutely awful Pokemon that can't beat the game at the very bottom, Ninjask in the Surge tier, and then empty B, D, F, and Bruno tiers. If you can think of a Pokemon that might fit into one of these empty tiers, let me know, and I'll consider doing that run to make the tier list look a little bit nicer aesthetically. That's it for Spinda. If you've made it this far, you are incredible. I will see you in my next video.